All right. Hello, everyone. On behalf of our team at Starkloff Disability Institute, I want to warmly welcome you to today's webinar titled Funding Inclusion, Universal Design with the Budget in Mind. My name is Rachel Goldmeyer, and I'm going to be your host for today. I also happen to be Starkloff's Universal Design Program Coordinator, and for a brief physical description of myself, I am a white woman with dark brown curly hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a black shirt with a red flower on it today. For those of you unfamiliar with Starkloff Disability Institute, we are a disability-led nonprofit in St. Louis, Missouri, and we believe in building inclusion where we live, learn, work, and play through our educational and candidate-facing programs. We are thrilled to be joined by an amazing lineup of experts. Our speakers today are Daniel Van Sant, Jason Kruse, and Kevin Nordmeyer. And throughout the session, you're going to hear examples, insights, and strategies that can inform your work, whether you're a designer, educator, student, or advocate. Thank you for taking the time to join us from wherever you are in the world. We're so excited to have such a passionate and engaged audience who's gathered here virtually to explore the importance of budgeting for universal design and learning that universal design does not have to be cost prohibitive. Before we dive in, we've got some quick housekeeping to go over. This session is going to be recorded, and we'll be sharing the link to the recording once we're able to have the captions professionally cleaned. Today's event is made up of a presentation followed by a question-answer session, so please drop your questions in the Q&A box as we go along. We'd love to hear from you. There are continuing education units that are going to be available through the AIA, and a certificate of attendance will also be available as part of today's webinar. So those will be going out at some point after the webinar has wrapped and we've had a chance to do the attendance. Expect it to take at least a couple of weeks for us to get through all of the processing and get that out to everybody. We also do have a satisfaction survey for this webinar, and it's our hope that everyone in attendance will take a few minutes to fill it out once the event has concluded. We will be dropping the link right now just in case anyone needs to leave early, and this feedback form really helps us in terms of what you liked and what we can improve on. So Katie will go ahead and drop that in the chat for us shortly. And we also want to thank you for being here. We know that your time is valuable and you had many choices for what to do today, and we sincerely think that this is an excellent use of your time to learn more about funding inclusion. We hope you leave today not only more informed, but ready to create change in your work, your community, and beyond. Now, I'd like to take a moment to begin our program with a thought-provoking presentation led by Daniel, Jason, and Kevin. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. This is Daniel Van Sant speaking. I'm just going to introduce myself and then kick it over to the architecture experts that we've got with us here. So I am Daniel Van Sant, the Director of Disability Policy at the Harkin Institute, based at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. So excited to be here virtually with everybody today. As a physical description, I am a white man wearing a dark blue suit with a gray tie, brown hair, not visible, but also very important. I have a physical disability that I bring into this space, so I always like to call that out as well. If people are not familiar with the Harkin Institute, I hope that you will learn more about us after today's presentation about our building. We were founded by Senator Tom Harkin, the lead architect of the Americans with Disabilities Act, when he decided to retire from the Senate. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank based in Des Moines, but work all over the country and all over the world, advancing, among other policy areas, disability rights for all people with disabilities. So I'm excited to be part of the lineup, and I will pass the virtual microphone over to Kevin.
Thanks, Daniel. My name is Kevin Nordmeyer. I'm an architect with BNIM. BNIM has offices in Kansas City and Des Moines. I'm in the Des Moines office. And a physical description is I'm a white male, 60 years old. So I'll share my age. And because I'm an architect, I'm wearing black. I'm wearing a black coat and a dark gray t-shirt, black round glasses. And I have multiple sclerosis, and utilize a wheelchair now. And so I'll say a little bit more about that as we're talking about the building and the process. But very glad to be here today.
And then to wrap up the introductions, I'm Jason Kruse, an architect that works through and the design and research I went into the Harkin Institute and some of the stuff we'll share today. Architect also here in Des Moines, and I am a white male wearing a black shirt and jacket and black glasses like all architects do, with graying hair. So great to be with everyone and happy to share this presentation. So I'll kick it off to you, Kevin, to start, and we'll go.
Okay, thank you. The slide before you, our title slide, says all a guidebook for inclusive design. We're going to talk about the Harkin building. The image on the screen is an image from Drake's campus looking at the Harkin Institute building, the Tom and Ruth Harkin Center. A lot of glass, so it glows at night. We're going to share a little bit about this building as a case study as we share the content for this presentation. Next slide, Jason. This is the obligatory learning outcomes for the continuing education credits, and all of you probably saw this as you registered, but we want to describe what universal design is and what it's not, and how universal design is different from the ADA, why budgeting for universal design early matters, and how to advocate for universal design within a project, how universal design benefits people of all ages and abilities, and we'll give some cost comparisons as we go through in some of the examples for the Harkin Center. Next slide, Jason. There we go. We have this organized this presentation in these kind of chapters, if you will. We want to talk about purpose. We want to talk about engagement, spirit, the all concept, and the all book that we wrote with the Harkin Institute. And then lastly, elevating and going beyond this, and some of the things that the Harkin Institute is starting to do with us and others in terms of helping elevate these concepts of universal design on many projects. Next slide, Jason. So for purpose, next slide. At BNIM, Bob Berkebile, the B in BNIM, was one of the founders of the thought process and founders of the concept of sustainable design in America, basically. He was one of the people that sat around the table and decided that we needed to create a United States Green Building Council, that we needed to start having a measuring system for LEED and the leadership in energy and environmental design for buildings. And then he went on to help think about living buildings and so forth. And so it's always been part of our DNA as a firm, the concept of sustainable building and being good stewards of what we do as architects and citizens. And what you see before you is how we start to think about what that means, sustainable design, and what it has historically had absent. It's sort of been, I suppose, implied, but it hasn't been specifically stated over the last 30 years. And that's two things you see in the bottom of this slide. This is a round diagram that shows resources, energy, water, and ecology around the top part of the diagram. And that's describing sort of the traditional metrics of sustainable design. But what's often not thought about are the two at the bottom, which is equity and wellness. And equity and wellness are kind of what we want to talk about today in terms of universal design within buildings. And what we like to characterize this as is human purposed integrated design. And that's where we think the future of sustainable design should be, is wrapping in all of these concepts to be good stewards for everyone. Next slide, Jason. And for human purposed integrated design, how we define that is human purposed. It's a deep commitment to humanity as the origin of inspiration, innovation, and prosperity. And integrated design is the delivery of insights enabled by clear communication by a diverse team with refined expertise. And what you'll hear in a moment from Daniel is the engagement process that they helped facilitate is key to having every voice heard in the process to make design as special as it possibly can be. Next slide, Jason. This is a little diagram that shows how we start to think about this. Uh, yeah, there we go. This slide. Well, an empathetic view is what we want to talk about here. This slide, again, it's a picture of the Harkin Institute from Drake's campus. An empathetic view then is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And so, next slide, Jason. And what that means for us is thinking about this broadly inclusive, broad spectrum of need. The ADA is because it had to deal with civil rights legislation, it deals with extremes and the physical requirements for those extremes of wheelchair, blindness, deafness, and so forth. But what this diagram shows is there's the physical things on the left side of this diagram. There's neurocognitive on the right. There's sensory in the middle, and there's everybody, all of us on this call right now on this webinar. Each one of us we're on this spectrum in some way. Some of us might be a little low of hearing or have difficulty seeing, or we might be blind, or we might be deaf, or we might be in a wheelchair like I am, or we might just use a cane. Or we might have difficulty with thought processes and so forth. So we're all on this spectrum. And what I hope you gather from this is that no matter what some of these costs are that we're going to talk about, every one of us on this call will benefit from universal design in some way. Next slide. And I started thinking about this in this process of the Harkin Center. The ADA diagrams for door clearances are on the left. Those are prescriptive, and it shows how to do things. And so for all of my career, I became an architect in 1993. I became licensed. And in 1990, I graduated. So the year that Tom Harkin crafted the ADA was the year I graduated and started designing buildings. So I've always known these diagrams, but I've only recently been in a wheelchair. I didn't actually know. I could guess why these exist this way, but it's just guessing, and you just follow requirements. The diagram on the right starts to look at an empathetic view of why is it that these doors have these clearances, and what does it actually mean for someone to approach a door, open it. Let's say they have coffee in one hand, trying to open a door with another, and it's too stiff of a door closure or things like that. So it's just this empathetic view is really what universal design is trying to do, is get beyond specific requirements, which exist for very good reasons, and we need to follow them. But it's this empathetic view in addition to that as to how we can design buildings better. Next slide, Jason. Daniel.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. This is Daniel Van Sant speaking now. So I think what we wanted to do here is Kevin really sets us off with this empathetic view. And so before we go too much further into our building, we wanted to highlight the importance of engaging people in the process. So Jason, if you can go to the next slide, please. I think what's important for architects and really anyone working in this space to keep in mind is we're not just making a physical place or structure that exists in a vacuum. You are making a building that people live in, work in, engage in, come in and out of. And so not missing that human-centered design and empathetic approach was really important for the purpose of our building. And so you'll see on the slide here, we have 4 project goals that are listed. The first is to create a distinguished landmark. The second is to celebrate Senator Harkin's work. The third is to engage the public and community. And then finally, the fourth is to serve as a model for universal design and sustainability. On the right hand of the slide, you'll see an exterior photo of our building on Drake University's campus. And we're going to go through some of those photos later, but you can see how our building is really set up to not only be a place where people like me come every day to work, but to serve as a site in our community, in our state, in our country to inspire this sort of change. So these were some of the project goals that were laid out. It's not just about the people who have offices here, but everybody who drives past this building, everybody who visits it. It sends a message and shares best practices. Next slide, Jason. One of the really vital steps that the team took in creating this building was to create a disability advisory committee and bring people with lived experience into the design process. I know Kevin often tells this story of, sitting down with people from Senator Harkin's uh, his network and asking if you could design a building, what would you want to include? And the first thing people said was, that's the first time anyone's ever asked me that or asked us that. And so to be really clear in upholding the nothing without us mantra of the disability rights movement, a key point of designing the building was to engage the disability community. So we had a disability advisory committee made up of people from across the country, across the spectrum of disability, from the very beginning of this project. And I think what was really important is this process. Um, some projects might have focus groups or include people with certain disabilities or specific backgrounds, but our project really included across the disability spectrum. We had people representing different types of wheelchair users, different spectrums of mental health, low vision to completely blind, hearing, hard of hearing through completely deaf, and everything in between. And what's really important about having all of these perspectives in one conversation is it led to some, I think, what we call compromise pieces. The blueprints that you're about to see after this section would look completely different if this was the Harkin Center for the blind or the Harkin Center for the deaf or any other specific disability group. But because we serve people across the disability spectrum, and Jason, you can go to the next slide here. Uh, we work at the Institute with people all across the disability spectrum. We don't focus on a specific population or a specific diagnoses, and we don't even exclusively focus on disability. Um, but to have all of those different disability experiences in one conversation gave us the ability to really negotiate the creation of a built environment in unique ways. So you could have a deaf participant like Claudia Gordon shown on the screen here with Senator and Ruth Harkin to her sides. Tell us about how in deaf design principles, deaf people want wide open visual access to spaces so that they can see their surroundings and get either linguistic or other information visually. And then we would have a participant who is blind in that same moment be able to say, that sounds really great for you, but a wide open space with no physical landmarks can be really disorientating for someone who is blind or has a visual impairment. And so rather than having someone like me or Kevin or Jason take those two pieces of information in a vacuum and have us try to mediate what the solution is, you could have a blind person and a deaf person communicating directly and come up with something that might not be what 100% either of them would want, but gets to enough of accessibility for both of them. And I think that's true across physical disability, sensory disability, as well. So as we go through some of the features of the building, you'll see some of these really unique compromise pieces that make our building what is so special. We'll go to the next slide, please, Jason. So this talks a little bit more about the advisory committee. I'll talk about this more at the end of the presentation, but this is really a process that we uh, created for the building and now push out through other projects and a service that we provide for other people. Um, Having this core advisory committee for people with disabilities was a really vital piece of this project and something that we're hoping that you as attendees will incorporate into your future work. On the slide here, to the left, we have some text. So the text reads that disability leaders from across the country provided input and helped direct the Institute's work in the area of disability policy and disability employment. This advisory committee met with the design team through every step of the process. So from programming to concept design, construction documents, and furniture design as well. On the right-hand side, you see a photo of members of this Disability Advisory Committee, including Kevin here in the photo, uh, workshopping some of the design points. You see a facilitator using an easel to keep track of notes. So this is really something that any of you watching can incorporate into your future architecture or programmatic work as well, to have this type of cross-disability um, system included in your work. Jason, next slide, please. Some takeaways that we learned from inclusion of the disability community in the design of our building that have carried forward is what we've got on the slide here. So these are some of the barriers that we've identified still existing today that we try to address with our disability policy and universal design work through the Institute. So on the left-hand side, there's a photo of Senator Harkin speaking with one of the advisory committee members who is using a power wheelchair. And on the right-hand side, we have bullet points of some of the takeaways um, that we've learned through the work that we want to pass forward for people to keep in mind. So first, that disability groups are often not included in conversations like the one that we're having today. And so if you're not including those voices, you're missing out on the real lived experience of people who are going to use the spaces that you are creating. The next bullet point said, with all due respect to our founder, the creator of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA is a starting point. I know that we in the community like to acknowledge what a watershed moment that was, and for many of us, that's the moment that we were given civil rights in our country, which is a great historic moment for the disability community, but it is a starting point in terms of where we are with construction regulations and accessibility moving forward. Um, as a non-architect in this conversation, I think we have maybe inappropriately viewed the ADA as um, the ceiling when really it's the floor. These are bare minimum requirements that have to be met to comply with the law, but often don't go far enough to really bring full inclusion and full accessibility for people. So just have that in mind, that while yes, your projects do need to comply with the built environment requirements for the ADA, that alone does not mean that your building product space is actually inclusive and accessible for people with disabilities. Know that those can be two different points. The next bullet point says that accommodations are an afterthought. Um, so knowing how a space can accommodate, include people with disabilities before you actually finish the construction can often help us get ahead of some of these things. So bring that accommodation into the beginning, and then you're not accommodating, you're just organically including people from the start. The next bullet point says that many times the wheelchair is the assumed control, and instead we need to consider all types of needs. As you'll hear in the next section of the presentation, our building is not just universally designed for people with physical disabilities, but that seems to be the first thought in architects and design minds, is how do we make a place physically accessible? But you'll see that our building, through the work with this committee, also has built environment features that are for people with sensory disabilities, mental health disabilities, visual impairments, hearing disabilities, not only the physical, not only physically disabled users. Um, then the final bullet point here is that we've learned that spaces and surfaces are not always conducive to navigation. So really thinking about not just aesthetically how a place looks, but how is the actual day-to-day use and function of a building going to impact the people who are coming through the space. Um, so with that, we'll go to the next slide and I'll pass the microphone again.
Jason, you want to go back one slide to that for just a second? I want to point out as a segue. In this image on the left part of this slide, it's Senator Harkin again talking with Alex, one of the advisory council members. He's in a power wheelchair that's fairly large, and you can see in this image the conference table that we were sitting at that has the bottle of water and a plate there, and his knees are slightly above that table surface, and the controls and the arms on his wheelchair are a good 8, 9 inches above the table. So his head is pretty tall. And then Candace sitting next to him, where her face is kind of cut off and there's a computer kind of screen in front of her. She's also in a wheelchair. She's in a wheelchair. She's a Paralympian. I think she still holds the record for the most medals in both Summer and Winter Olympics. But and if I was in my wheelchair sitting between them, my head would be probably between theirs in terms of height above the floor. So this is the perfect example of the ADA was written for largely manual wheelchairs in 1990. But my wheelchair and Candace's wheelchair and Alex's wheelchair, he pointed out that day that he said, look at us sitting here next to each other. He said, see where my head is to the table, see where Candace's head is to the table. Just realize that there are different kind of space needs and different kind of requirements, even for the wheelchair community, you know. So it's just that opened my eyes that day to start to understand not only the nuances between all of this, but that broad spectrum of need that everybody has. Next slide, Jason. So these next series of slides we're going to do pretty quickly, and what they're going to do is they have a word on a black slide with a white word that I'll read, and then we just want to kind of describe the spirit of the building, which you'll find as Jason kind of starts his portion of the presentation after this, is what universal design is for us is really creating a spirit of place. Because again, as Daniel mentioned, the ADA exists for the technical requirements. So we didn't, and again, Tom Harkin told us to take that as a given, but go beyond it. So going beyond for us, and the definition of universal design historically has been about creating that spirit of place. It's not necessarily placing more technical requirements on the process, but it's elevating awareness in the design process. So this first slide here says spirit. Next slide, Jason. And for us, that spirit that the building encompasses on the left side of the slide here are white words on a black background. So all the words I read from here on out are white words on black backgrounds, along with an image. So this shows an image of how the ramp in this building sort of crosses itself as you navigate to the upper floor. It's all white surfaces, very clean and white and daylighted space. So it's about beauty and inspiration. It's about comfort and wellness. It's about connectivity and collaboration. It's about achievement and performance, agility and resilience, and welcoming and embracing. Next slide, Jason. On this slide, on the left is an image from a tall glass. It's floor to ceiling glass that's 20. It's about 28 feet tall. It shows the ramp extending in front of these windows and looking back toward Drake's campus, where you see a sidewalk and trees in an early springtime image. On the right side of the image is a floor plan, the main site plan and floor plan of the building that shows how the building was pulled back from the corner of the city street to allow for sort of a space to navigate, so we're not just compressed up against a busy city street. It allowed for landscaping and stormwater management, and the entrance then could be somewhat protected and quieter to the south on the southeast corner of this rectangular building plan. The base plan here, the floor plan is all public spaces on the main level. So when you enter in that southeast corner, that first space you come to is what you see on the left, where it's a taller sort of social gathering reception kind of space. It's a flexible kind of space, gallery function as well, and which opens into a boardroom, flexible boardroom space. Then also on this plan in the northwest corner of this rectangle is a small auditorium of about 100 seats, sloping floor. And then and then there's a hallway, and the ramp starts in the center hallway in this building plan. And then everything south of it are more of the servant spaces. So it's like toilets elevator, a little research space, a serving kind of space for catering, kind of catering kitchen, and a mechanical room. Next slide. This is an image of the garden on the east part of the site. So as you enter from the east, this it's an incredibly beautiful bioswale. It's a stormwater management device. So it's taking all of the site water from the parking lot and everything and processing it and returning that water to the aquifer eventually. But it's processed with all of these beautiful plants that Ruth Harkin is passionate about. And so there was a special place here in her name for this setting. So this is a series of images of that beautiful sort of flowering landscape. On the upper floor, then this is a rectangular floor plan on the right of the building, and it shows the ramp in the northeast corner of that plan as it circulates around to the upper floor. The upper floor then is where the work gets done, and it's where Daniel's office is and all the other staff of the Harkin Institute. And so you'll see the images on the left are just well daylighted imagery that Jason will go into some of the details of some of this, but you see just a highly daylighted space, very open and flexible and visually accessible, seeing into offices with a lot of glass on the walls and so forth, being able to see outdoors and having that daylight borrowed inside as well. Next slide. Here's an image standing looking with that in that entrance hall gathering space, looking outside. So you see that ramp extending around you, wrapping around you. And this was very intentional for us that the ramp, the committee said to us that Daniel mentioned, that committee said, can it be one story? And we said, no, the site's going to kind of dictate that it's a two-story building. And then they said, well, we challenge you to have it be that everybody in the building can get upstairs without having to use stairs and without having to use the elevator. They didn't say make a ramp, but that's pretty much what was implied. And so we, from day one, as Jason and I and Lana and some others started sketching this building, we started thinking about how do we incorporate a ramp into this. So the ramp here that you see is not only a functional thing to get people from the first floor to the second floor, but it's a spiritual piece to the building. It's a symbol. It's a visual symbol that not only you see inside like this and it wraps around you and stitches spaces together, but it also is seen from the outside deliberately so that people will wonder, what is that about? And start to question and want to go inside and learn more about what the building's about. Next slide. These are just a couple more images. This is the image of that ramp from the outside on the right. So it's looking across that garden space into the glass building. And we did a lot of glass on this part of the building so that it could be glowing at night and be seen from campus and the intersection to the right of this street intersection. And on the left is an image of a small, quieter space at a landing spot on this ramp so that it's not just a ramp from point A to point B. There's moments off of it where you can stop and have a meeting or stop and work in that area and so forth. Next slide. This one, the words on this slide say to be considerate. It's careful not to cause inconvenience or hurt to others. It's showing careful thought. This is how we approach this building as well. Next slide. So these two images, again, they just kind of show, image on the left shows a view of the ramp extending around that center gathering space and looking outside the glass. The image on the right is this sort of daylighted work environment of open office, shows a person sitting in an open office setting on the left side of the image, having views outside to the landscape, and then these glassed office walls on the right that provide for privacy when they need it for conducting their business. Next slide. Gracious, I think, is the last one here we wanted to focus on. And so it's marked by kindness and generosity of spirit. And we think that as we were looking at this building, all of these values really do for us symbolize how Tom Harkin conducted himself, still does today, but conducting himself in collaboration with others. Like Bob Dole and John McCain and Ted Kennedy and others in the creation of the ADA. And so that sort of gracious, generous spirit is we wanted the building to also convey that same attitude. Next slide. So again, here's a view from campus looking at the building on the right where it's glowing at night. You can see that on the left. Um, the entrance on the southeast corner of the building. You can see the entrance here with the brick glass and an overhang at the entry so that there's a different auditory experience at the entry for those that might have low vision or blindness. They can sense the lower canopy there where the entrance is. And then lastly, for this section is just two more images to show, again, how the ramp, when it extends up to the top level, you get views through into spaces and then views outside as well. Next slide, Jason.
All right. This is Jason speaking now. We're going to kind of transition into kind of talking about the strategies specifically of this project and some of the things that go into planning for universal design, both from cost and planning standpoint. So this slide that just has the text all kind of sets that up. And kind of going down to the next slide, everything that Kevin and Daniel spoke to was kind of through the design phase of the Harkin Institute. We were gathering information and doing a bunch of research. And as the project was kind of nearing completion, we were like, man, how do we capture the spirit of this building, all the strategies and research that went into it to help promote universal design on all projects kind of moving forward for us and others that can learn from this building. And so what we really wanted to do was create a book that was both for universal design principles and best practices for inclusion and equity. And this next slide shows just a snapshot of all the research and resources and experts that are out there. The Harkin Institute is just one small piece of the puzzle, but there's all these other great institutes, research components, documents that are on the screen that have a bunch of great resources. And so we utilized a lot of this research into the design and strategies that went into the Harkin Institute. And I'm going to go to the next slide. And really, how do we make it inclusive and open to everyone? And we wanted to take all of that research and put into a document and book that's free to everyone, access to everyone so that they can learn from the strategies and implementation for the Harkin Institute. So this next slide shows the cover, which is a flip book. So it's a two-sided book. So this is on the left is the front, which says all the making of the Tom and Ruth Harkin Institute. And it kind of goes through kind of what Kevin and Daniel spoke about at the beginning of this presentation. And then you flip the book over in the physical form, in the digital, you just kind of flip through the pages. But on the other side, then it is all, a guidebook of strategies for inclusive design. And it captures the spirit of this building and all of the strategies for both the building components and furniture. So there's about 28 building components and another complementary 20 furniture components that really kind of dial in on what went into this building so that other people that are approaching a new project or a renovation can reference this and kind of get a quick understanding of like, okay, how can I be better than the ADA or involve inclusive design? This is a very tangible, digestible document to help start the conversation early on in a project. As Kevin mentioned, creating a spirit and being generous just requires this thought at the very forefront of a project. It's hard to do this afterwards or after. So getting this in front of people kind of as early on in the planning strategy is the goal. And this, on the next slide, it shows kind of the web page of where you can access it. And then on the right side of the slide, there's a QR code as well as a link. This will get you to the online digital book itself. I'll pause on this for a couple seconds, but then we have this same slide at the end of the presentation. So when we're doing the Q&A, we may just leave it up so that you can also reference it there, as well as the slide deck will be available after the presentation as well. And so how we approach this is kind of described on this next slide. There's the universal design principles that are from North Carolina State University. There are 7 principles. What they read on the screen is those 7 principles on the left: equitable use, flexible in use, simple and intuitive, perceptible information, tolerance, error, low physical effort, size and space for approach and use. And those are all great components. And we wanted to even simplify that into kind of 4 components that then you see on the right that break down the strategies that we kind of have implemented into the Harkin Institute in these 4 categories that you see. Generous space. So you create a space where you do not have to ask for accommodations. What is needed is available. Clear path. Allow for an environment that is intuitive to the user, including regular part-time users and visitors. Equitable experiences. Solve for the function necessary in the most inclusive way possible. Non-exclusionary. No one is excluded from an experience because of their ability, gender, etc. Individual empowerment. No limitation in one's ability to use a space throughout the day. And I know, Kevin, you wanted to kind of expand upon this a little bit as well.
Yeah. So what Jason just read there, this is Kevin again. What Jason just read there, I hope you all can gather, because I know you're all here to hear about costs. And I know some people, one of the questions that came up before that we were given before this that someone asked was, is there a standard sort of upcharge for buildings like this? A typical cost beyond what a typical cost per square foot would be. And that kind of question is exactly the same question that was asked in the late 90s and 2000s with respect to the LEED buildings. It was a big debate. Well, LEED buildings cost more. It's going to be 20% more or 5% more. What's it going to be? And the answer back then, and it's still true today, and that's the same response for universal design is it all depends on the building that you're designing, the creativity of the design team, the engagement of user groups, as Daniel's mentioning, and willing contractors. It requires a team of people in an integrated way to think about design strategies for creating a broadly inclusive building in the most cost-effective way possible. You'll see here, what I wanted to do is show, so all the things that Jason just mentioned about the all book guiding principles, all of those statements are just goal statements for what a design team should be thinking as they're designing the space. In theory, none of that costs anything. It's the creativity of the design team to make a building broadly inclusive with what you're going to have to do anyway, just to do the building. It's just how you organize space and how you provide for access and so forth doesn't have to cost any more. And I wanted to illustrate that by this, for example, too. So these are the North Carolina State University principles, universal design principles on this slide from 1997 that Jason showed on the prior slide. This just shows 3 quick examples of what those mean. So for example, equitable use to North Carolina State back in 97, the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. Okay. The following guidelines underpin principle 1. Provide the same means of use for all users, identical wherever possible, avoid it segregating or stigmatizing, provisions for privacy, security, safety, make the design appealing to all users. None of those items cost money, extra money. It's being creative in terms of how you do those things that you're going to do anyway as you design the building and create the building. It's a matter of orchestrating that in such a way that it makes it broadly accessible to everyone. Go to the next slide, Jason. Another example from those principles, principle 3 is simple and intuitive use. Use the design or use of the design is easy to understand regardless of the user's experience, knowledge, language skills, and so forth. So some of these guidelines include eliminate unnecessary complexity, be consistent with user expectations and intuition, accommodate a wide range of literacy and language skills, arrange information consistent with its importance, provide effective prompting and feedback. So again, it's about principles. All of these statements are principles beyond the requirements of the ADA, beyond the requirements of door clearances, ramp slope, and so forth. So this again is about creating a spirit of place, and it all relies on the creativity of the design team, from the owners to the designers to all the engineers and contractors on the project and the stakeholders engaged. Next slide. And just last quick example from those North Carolina state principles, low physical effort. So the design can be used efficiently and comfortably in the use with minimal fatigue. Allow users to maintain a neutral body position, reasonable operating force, minimize repetitive actions. So again, none of these are saying things that require dollars. And I think some things that we're going to touch on now that Jason's going to drill into are things that could cost more. And it's how you choose to balance that within an overall budget, like with all the other decisions on a project.
So this is Jason speaking again. So we wanted to dig into not all 28 of the strategies that are outlined in the guidebook, but start to highlight some of those specific to this presentation, talking about some of the cost strategies and how to go about them. But on this slide, you can see kind of within the book, we try to diagram very clearly all of these strategies out. So again, getting to that idea of like being able to digest this very early on in a project in a very clear and understanding way, so that building owners and teams can quickly reference this and be like, oh, that makes sense. This is really important. This is important to me. This is important to our project, and trying to kind of get as much of these as possible, but at least like pull the ones that are most relevant to your specific project, because not all of these might not be relevant to your project. Or if you're doing an existing building, some strategies would not apply. And then kind of within the book, within those 4 categories, we have them broken out. So there's about five to six strategies within each of those categories. So then as you dig into each section, each strategy in the book has a diagram. So on this slide on the left shows the diagram for the first strategy, which is path width, and give you a clear visual of what you're trying to achieve with that strategy. And then on the right side of the slide, which is then the adjacent page in the book or on screen, is what is the problem that this is trying to solve? What are the solutions? So making sure that you're trying to create a 6-foot minimum clear circulation path throughout a building. And then what does that support? And so each one of these strategies gives that kind of that empathetic or that spirit view of like, what are you trying to do with these strategies? And so like for this one, it's important so that in kind of a depth-based principle, 2 people that are signing can walk next to each other, and you don't have really any pinch points where one person has to go in front of the other, or 2 wheelchairs can pass by each other. So each strategy within the book kind of gets outlined in this format, and as you dig into it and use it within your own work or related to your own project, that is kind of how it's laid out. One of the first things I think we wanted to talk about was, how much more is it to do this stuff than another project, kind of to what Kevin was speaking to. This is all about setting priorities. Every project's different. Every project has different project goals. We know that every project isn't probably not going to have a ramp that circulates between the building. I think what we wanted to do with this slide is show kind of the net to gross comparison. As designers, as architects, as building owners, we use this metric a lot when we understand how efficient a building is. So how much mechanical space, how much circulation space, the spaces that quote unquote aren't usable every day, those kind of don't get counted in the net square foot. So you kind of have the net square foot, which is the usable space. So everything on the slide on the right that is shaded in gray, so the classroom, the offices, those are gray. That is net square feet. That counts as like the usable area. Everything outside of that, that is included in that, so the circulation, mechanical space, that's your gross square feet. So that's the entire building footprint, whether it's usable or not usable space. And so you divide those and you kind of get your net to gross percentage. There's various building types will have different kind of standards or benchmarking. The biggest ones that we can think of now are like, in the commercial industry with BOMA and rental spaces with commercial office space. But then on higher ed and university campuses, you can see the kind of the goal of in higher ed is trying to be about 60% efficient. Is usually about where a typical university building falls, just given all the custodial requirements, mechanical requirements, all the extra stuff that goes into them. And so on the Harkin Institute project, obviously the ramp was an important part. That ramp area at about 1,700 net square feet, it kind of knocked down our net to gross by 10%. So if you said, we'll eliminate the ramp from this building, the Harkin Institute building would still fall within that kind of standard higher education facility, about 61%. But for this project, it was very important to include that ramp. And like Kevin said, the ramp is more than just a means to get from where it was serving other functions. So you could also make a case that it actually had a usable space to it. We try not to put dollars to a lot of this stuff because with escalation and everything, it's hard to have dollars in your mind. So percentages is always a good way to look at some of these things as you're benchmarking for future projects.
And as this is Kevin, as we were pulling together information for this presentation, we don't even have information on what that ramp actually cost because it was never a discussion because it was essential to the building. And so it was never on a list to try to value engineer because it was just there. But it does cost something and it didn't have to happen. But for them, it was essential.
So then moving on, some of the other we just kind of want to highlight for the rest of the presentation, some like low hanging fruit or things specific to this project, but planning for future capabilities. On this project, we have an adult changing table in the family restroom, companion care restroom, but it's not height adjustable. It's just kind of a fixed. But what we did do is knowing that, okay, it can't be in the cards now for budget concerns, but how can we provide at least the infrastructure for some of these strategies so that down the road, if there was a grant or a donor and they could buy a height adjustable adult changing table that's about $10,000, how can we make sure that when we build the building, there's the power for it, there's blocking in the wall, and you're planning the clear space in the restroom for that. So being able to, even though you can't maybe procure or provide all these things day one, being able to think through how can we at least provide the infrastructure and the future flexibility for that. Another one is single users to restrooms versus separated toilet rooms. Everyone loves bathroom talk on a project. It's inevitable. But I think this gives a really good understanding of, for this specific project of being an office space, using the fixture counts. And we did a comparison of what the square footage would be for separated, so a separate men's and women's restroom and a single user restroom versus just say all the restrooms are single users. And you can actually see that it requires less square footage given this number of fixtures to just do all individual single user direct access restrooms which provides more flexibility, more privacy, and more options for restrooms in the building. And so when we think about it, I know the code requires separated restrooms, but a lot of jurisdictions will allow for variances. And so in Des Moines, we actually now have a precedent for this project that allows for single user restrooms throughout. And so you don't have to use separated restrooms.
So that was
Lighting
actually so that was actually a net cost reduction to do that strategy on that project.
Lighting considerations. Lighting is a big component for depth space principles. Really focusing on this slide on the left, you can see, the Harkin Institute, we had a separate lighting package that was about $27,000. That was kind of, call it that above and beyond of just providing light for people to use a space. But this light, the light that we provided for this building was indirect lighting. So you can see on the image on the right, how we're kind of washing the walls instead of having direct downlight onto spaces. We're avoiding direct shadows and glare. The fixtures are all were selected specifically to hide the LED source, so you don't have kind of those glare bombs when you're working or when you're in a meeting room that can be stressful on your eyes and strain. And then, highlighting special features or where like a decision point is needed along a corridor, providing some specialty lighting in that sense. And then the other strategy that is more of a space planning strategy is meeting in the round. I think when we all think about specifically boardrooms, but conference rooms, we kind of think about the head of the table concept. So most typical boardrooms is a long rectangular table with chairs on one end, and then everyone's kind of staring at each other across the narrow table. Within this strategy, we're trying to do a lot of things, but this is also within the depth space principle, but actually making the proportions of your meeting rooms a little larger and more square so that you have more of a round arrangement. And what this does, it gives you better sight lines to everybody participating. And that helps both for people that are signing, people that are trying to read lips. But when you do this strategy, thinking about technology and how you orientate technology. So when you do meet in the round, we still have a front of the room, but you also have additional monitors on the side wall, both for confidence monitors, but allows for individuals to not have that neck strain of like having to turn 90 degrees and watch the front of the room. They can actually just stare straight ahead and see the same monitor or see the virtual participants. So in this strategy, the potential additional cost would be, an extra monitor and some additional technology infrastructure kind of on those side walls to allow for that kind of meeting in the round concept. And then this photo is kind of a post-construction, but of the Harkin Institute, the boardroom where we talk about the indirect lighting. So we have cove lighting that kind of washes the walls. But then to Kevin's point that he made very early on is that this is a boardroom and a conference room, but within it, we actually have height adjustable tables. So you can see the two tables that are on the end are actually, they plug in and are height adjustable. So that idea of people that have multiple height wheelchairs or different sizes, this can accommodate, multiple folks within. Signage is kind of a no-cost strategy, but the way we think about signage is outlined of, making sure that you have raised letters, you have Braille type 2, and then the information redundancy. So providing like pictures, pictograms of like what that space is used for. So that idea of providing information in as many forms as possible. And then thinking about like the image on the right of contrast. So how a signage can contrast the wall so it's very legible and approachable. Office enclosures. We actually provided demountable walls for this project, We did a cost comparison from demountable walls, which is kind of a prefabricated glass front with the option of a sliding door, which is better for accessibility versus a swing door, and versus a traditional wall with metal studs, drywall, doors, and frames. And it was only about a 5% increase over standard construction. But what that allowed for was future flexibility, so they could move these walls or provide them after the original construction was complete. It provides transparency into the space, which is a depth space principle. And then views out, so people on the inside can kind of see through offices and see the outside, and allows daylight deeper into the building. Elevator use is another strategy and something to think about very early on within the Harkin Institute. And one of the strategies is thinking about elevators that are front and rear loaded, so that you actually don't have to turn around in an elevator to exit. So the image on the right shows that diagram of somebody be able to kind of pull the front of the elevator, go up, and then just go straight out. And then the idea of sizing, so using more of a stretcher size or gurney size hospital or service size elevator, has about a 30% increase in cost, but it allows for 2 wheelchair users to use at the same time. It also allows just for a little more space to move furniture through, but not having to turn. And then how does this impact existing buildings? You know, this is another project that's on Drake's campus, but you know, we took all these principles into the renovation of an existing building. And when we think about prioritizing, you know, most old buildings, especially pre 1990 into the ADA, usually don't have accessible toilet rooms, or are not, or have been kind of modified to kind of be accessible, but not really. And so what we've been starting to think about of, instead of trying to renovate an existing toilet room and kind of making it a little bit better, we've been taking the strategy of providing single user restrooms adjacent to the original restrooms to allow for that extra added accessible elements within a building. But these same strategies, this is just an example of one, but those same strategies that are used in a new building can be applied to an existing renovation, a tenant fit out project. Again, it's building that kind of spirit of place that we've been talking through. And then we'll kind of quickly get through this section, but I just wanted to highlight the furniture strategies. You know, it doesn't stop at the building elements. This slide shows kind of the table of contents portion for the furniture portion of the strategies, but we took that same rigor in the building elements when we were designing the furniture. And so on this next slide, it has the same layout where it uses, you know, very nice diagrammatic images to show, you know, when you lay out furniture, how do you think about settings and their order and the circulation and making sure it's not cluttered. And on the next slide, how do you think about finishes? So can the seat of the chair, or in this image, the couch, be a contrasting tone to the floor, so that for someone that has visual impairment can see that. And then providing choice. You know, we have a whole host of variety of furniture settings, which allows for that choice and flexibility for the user groups. And so I know we're not going to dig into a lot of the furniture, but just wanted to really highlight that is kind of another critical component to this whole conversation.
Okay, this is Daniel speaking. So I'm going to jump in here to transition us to the last couple points and then open up for questions. So I do want to also throw out there, as Kevin said, there are a lot of opportunities for improvements to our building. The three of us are also growing and changing our experiences here that I'll talk about in the next slide. If there's anyone watching this recording or listening today who wants to sponsor that height adjustable adult size changing table, please reach out to me. I will put your nameplate on it. This is one of my fundraising goals, is to get that adult size changing table to be height adjustable. So hit me up after this recording if that might be you. Jason, next slide, please. Other ways that you can financially and programmatically support the Harkin Institute include in working with us on your future projects. So, this process and these goals and elements that we just went through for the Harkin Center building have also grown and developed into other projects that our team has worked on with Kevin, Jason, and the other folks at BNIM, as well as into other projects as well. So on the slide here, you will see the text reads the Des Moines Park, a summary of strategies for inclusive design, and then the image is a sort of artistic relief style rendering of an outdoor park space that the three of us worked on here in Des Moines to be a universally designed park as well. And so just as we did with the creation of our office, public building space, we held focus groups, created a disability advisory committee, and applied the same process to this outdoor space. Next slide, please, Jason. So you can see here, I won't spend a ton of time on this because I want to get to the questions, but we took these same strategies that you will see as you're flipping through the all book and with some tweaks for the outdoor space, started applying them to other areas. So if we didn't pitch you on coming to visit Des Moines, Iowa to see the Harkin Institute building alone, we can also welcome you to some of our universally designed park spaces to see how these principles really apply in other settings as well. Outside of BNIM, other groups engage with the Institute to do this type of work. I've applied these principles and focus group questions and strategies to art museums, to other cultural spaces, to movie theaters, and programs as well. So just know that while the audience here might be really focused on a certain type of architecture, I'm not sure who is all watching today. These universal design principles and the disability inclusion processes that we've laid out for the building, the three of us have applied to built environment in the outside space and have applied to other projects as well. So keep that in mind for whatever type of next project you have that hopefully you've picked up something today that you can apply to that. And I think I can offer the three of us are willing, of course, to answer some questions today, but that you can reach out to us afterward to see if there's a way for us to support or get involved in your work. If you want to do the next slide, I think it's the second to last one, perhaps. And so, um, in the spirit of generosity or being generous that we have up here on the slide, giving or sharing abundance without hesitation. Again, we want to thank everyone for joining today. It looks like we have plenty of time scheduled for questions. If we don't get to something, though, know that you can reach out to us to continue that. So I think if we go to the next slide, we do want to have the all book QR code and link that Jason referenced. Think that's a good idea, Jason, to leave this up while we're maybe fielding a couple questions.
Hello, this is Katie. I'm going to be reading some of the questions we've received in the Q&A. If anybody in the audience would like to submit a question, you're going to click on the Q&A function toward the bottom of your screen, and you can send us a question through there. So one of the questions we received is in regards to standards from the ADA that were designed for a manual wheelchair user. Do you have a standard measurement that you use to accommodate a broader range of size needs as it applies to areas where the codes like clearances, where there are codes like clearances, clear floor space, doors, etc.?
This is Kevin. I'll field that one. We've been the ADA. I don't believe the ADA has been amended yet to go beyond the 5 foot turning radius. ANSI has gone beyond the 5 foot turning radius to I believe it's 5'7". There is some research that's been done. Harvard Osterberg at Iowa State University actually recommends even going up to 6 feet radius at times. If you've just experienced people in some of these larger wheelchairs, they can get pretty large. And so, what we try to do when we're designing buildings is we try to go like 5, 7 to 6 foot radius, and then you have to start balancing that with realities of overall space. And if it turns out that we can't quite provide 6 feet, we will try to reduce that down a little bit, but we try to err on the side of like that 5, 7 to 6 feet as a starting point for design. Um, right before this started, um, Jason and I were in the bathroom, and in our bathroom we have a 5 foot by 5 foot ADA compliant stall. My wheelchair is pretty efficient, pretty tight, and it has omnidirectional front wheels, so I can pivot really at a point, and so it's as tight as you can really do it. And even with that, I said to Jason, I don't get how people in wheelchairs are expected to go front first into a 5 by 5 toilet stall. I have to back in to that kind of toilet stall. And even with that, I don't have enough room to really maneuver much. And so, one thing we hope we leave you with, and Jason touched on it, and Daniel and I in a lot of these slides is that one thing that will cost more as a strategy for design for inclusive design. The principles back in 1997 that were developed and our principles, it's about generous space. So a hallway that's 6 feet wide instead of something that's just code minimum at 44 to 48 inches. That adds square footage to your building. That will add, dollars to a project on a dollars per square foot basis. Um, Creating more space in a conference room so that somebody in a wheelchair can navigate around the table and not just come in the door and barely make it, to the table. So those kind of things will create a building that's a little larger, and cost more as a result. Most of these other strategies, as you've seen, don't really result in significant cost to the project. I'll give you one more quick example. I'm in the process of designing and hopefully getting built, because I need it desperately, an accessible house. My wife and I, again, are nearing retirement age. We're trying to retire into a fully accessible house because our current one is not accessible. My mother, who's 90, lives alone in a house that's got one entrance that's kind of at grade accessible. The garage is not, but she has a 1,750 square foot, 2 bedroom plus a den, 2 bath house, 1,750 square feet. I'm trying to do the same size of house, the same size of components there. I have an additional half bath plus an additional sort of den office space. And I'm about 30% more area than what my mother has. My mother's is really not accessible. But for me, I need to be able to get through my kitchen, around furniture in a living room. I need to get into the bathroom. Bathroom's bigger, bedroom is bigger because of the wheelchair. So 20 to 30% for a house, for example, is what I'm realizing is kind of a premium that I'm having to pay because of my wheelchair, basically. So it's again, that's all about the size and type of building and the creativity that someone applies to solving the problem of access.
I think
Sorry for the long answer.
no, I'll chime in there too, just to give the door spiel, because I think talking about clearances and everything, we didn't talk about it in the presentation, but doors on any project. So what we learned was, to help with the topic and the question with clearances, if you don't need a door, don't put one in at all. If you do need a door, do a sliding door. So like the main entrances to buildings, use an automatic sliding door versus a manual swing door. And then if you have to have a swing door, so like some codes require swing doors in meeting rooms of certain size, put an ADA operator on like public facing swing doors to public spaces. So like the auditorium at the Harkin Institute has ADA auto operators on it with a push button. That auto operator, is like $4,000 to $5,000, right? But those kind of three little strategies on doors and how you approach doors help to even alleviate the need to hopefully discuss clearances because you don't have to deal with it because the doors or the threshold is.
Thank you. We're getting some great questions submitted, so I'm not certain we're going to be able to get through all of them. But as it's been stated, Daniel, Kevin, and Jason would love to engage with you. So if you do have questions outside of this, don't hesitate to reach out. Our next question is, does BNIM have an interiors department that assisted with the finishes and wayfinding signage, or was there a specialty consultant used for that as it pertains to universal design?
We did all of the signage in-house. We do that for a lot of our projects. We have worked with consultants as well. But for the Harkin Institute, we worked closely with the university architect, Michelle Huggins there, and also the user, group. But then our own staff worked on the signage design.
And for the furniture component, just want to make sure we give a shout out to Miller Knoll. At that time, it was Herman Miller. They're now Miller Knoll, but they have a really strong research arm, and they were able to lean into this process and have really kind of continued the dialogue with Daniel and us to kind of keep elevating and pushing how furniture and product design within can continue to evolve along this process as well.
Excellent. Our next question is, obviously, when designing environments to address multiple sensory populations, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So I'm curious how you would find the right balance of accommodating one population without depriving too much of the other. Is that something where you would rely on feedback from user groups or the client beforehand?
This is Daniel. I can
Yeah, Daniel.
jump in here and then, yeah, Kevin, let you talk to this. So
Um,
I I think I would probably start with talking to the client, right? Who is the intended audience of the building? How is the space or project going to be used? And if there is a specific consideration of a population, right, that could lead that conversation, right? If they have a specific audience in mind. But I think after that, it really is something that we develop through the stakeholder engagement by having people with lived experience involved in this conversation. And I think what we find is, right, every disabled person, we all need something different, even if we have the same diagnosis. My preferences or needs might be completely different from someone else with the same kind of air quotes physical uh, needs as myself. And so I think it really is about that conversation. And sometimes just having disabled people know that they had an input in some of the features gets you quite a long way. But it's really that conversation of, we understand that this is what you would want to be 100% accessible. That's not possible for whatever reason. So what gets us to 90% or 80? And when the affected populations are included in that conversation, you get the solution and you have members of the population who understand why. So knowing, I didn't get exactly what I wanted, but I was consulted. I know how they made that decision. And instead of giving me this, I got this thing instead. Um, so I think that part of the process really gets you a long way in that solution and in making sure that your audience feels understood. I don't know that there's a specific math behind what people would and would not accept, but it's really about having people with lived experience leading that conversation and driving the solution.
Daniel's 110% correct on that. And that's the value that I learned and what I've seen in the Harkin Institute's work. Prior to the Harkin Institute building, um, I and probably almost every other architect in the country, with some exceptions probably, you're just designing to code. And so you're designing to the requirements that are laid out in front of you, and you're making assumptions, if you don't have disabilities, you're making assumptions based on, why does those happen and so why those requirements exist. But you're just meeting those requirements. And without the dialogue and without the facilitation and that stakeholder engagement that like the Harkin Institute provided for us and can provide for, people on this call in the future, you just don't have, you're not going to maximize the opportunities for making these broadly inclusive environments. And yes, as Daniel mentioned in the very early slides, there are compromises. So for some uh, for some lighting needs that a deaf person may have for eye strain is maybe different than what a low vision person has for being able to see something that's brighter. So there are some balances and fine tuning. And if I don't have that dialogue that Daniel can help facilitate, I'm just guessing, and I'm probably going to guess wrong. And so absolutely, it's all about that stakeholder engagement.
And this is Daniel speaking again. I just also would add that's maybe feels a little bit more tangible. It it can also be that like our building has multiple solutions in multiple spaces, right? So a deaf person might not have exactly what they want in the boardroom, but there's something else in the building that is geared specifically for them and vice versa. So it's sometimes providing that range of solutions and opportunities in that same space. So without going too much into the furniture, right? Like there are pieces of furniture in the building that I personally really find inaccessible for myself and do not like. But that's okay because there are other pieces that I do like. And if you would have just had me pick all the furniture, you're going to find solutions that don't work for other people. So I might not be super comfortable in every space in my own building, but there are spaces where I do feel like this is the perfect chair for me. So it's kind of that give and take of like not everyone's going to get everything ideally in every location, but there's somewhere where you feel like you are included and have that best practice. So when you have that spectrum of solutions, right, n- not everything is to 100%, but you get what you want somewhere along that continuum.
Thank you. I think we've got time for probably one more question. Can you please talk a little bit about incorporating smart technology design elements into buildings as a way to increase access and ease of use?
Um,
Got it, Kev.
Jason, do you want to take this? I can
I
pile
can.
on if you want to start.
I'll start. I think we have some strategies in the book. Actually, one is I think actually just called technologies, but there's things like like hearing loops in not only large conference auditoriums, but they now make hearing loop technology that can go into smaller conference rooms that we've seen a benefit. I think conference rooms and meeting rooms is probably where the technology gets the most robust, especially when we're talking about these kind of meeting in the rounds, having monitors on side walls, really making sure that you have like a video conference technology solution in your projects. So um, at the Harkin Institute, there's a video conferencing system that was integrated into it. So it's kind of a touch screen that's set up, and you say like, I want this presentation setting 1, 2, or 3, and there's presets. That does take a level of time and care and a little bit more cost to make sure the backbone infrastructure is set up within some of these meeting rooms that are a little more complex versus just having a one projector and a screen. And then how you set up cameras, like how the camera is positioned, what type of camera it is. So if it's actually the tracking camera that will follow who's talking, or if it's just a 360 camera in the room. I'm thinking about nowadays, this building, Harkin was designed pre-pandemic and built during the pandemic, but it's a testament to kind of long life, loose fit, where they were able to adapt and modify, and it actually works with like a hybrid meeting. But nowadays we use so many hybrid meetings where you have some virtual participants, some in person. And so having the technologies so that virtual participants still feel heard and are in the room is important to integrate.
I would add, and this is Kevin, I would add a couple of things to that. I mentioned this house I'm trying to do. As I've been thinking about that house, my arms and my hands are starting to get a little funky because of my MS. And so my dexterity and my grasping isn't as good as it used to be, in addition to the fact that my legs don't work anymore. But so I've been thinking about what are things that I can incorporate in that house. And this would be true of this Harkin building too. We didn't do this necessarily holistically in the Harkin building, but are there ways that I can maneuver in and out of spaces where I don't have to be able to rely on my hands even? Maybe I can rely on my voice. Or almost all spaces now in commercial buildings have occupancy sensors that help turn on lights and things like that. Those are really good. But if I could use my voice in my house to say, hey Siri or Alexa, close the blinds or turn the TV on or uh, answer the doorbell or those kinds of things, I probably will need, at some point to be able to do that. Or and expanding this thought about technology, something that Daniel and I learned through some of his focus groups is that people with disabilities, particularly those with mobility disabilities, rely on websites. I do. I scope out if a few days in advance of going to a building or going to a meeting, I'll have to scope out on a website. Where am I going? Where's the parking? Where's the door? What kind of building is it? Does it have a bathroom? All of those kinds of things. And so expanding even beyond building centric stuff to just digital access for people to become more aware of your facility, so they know what to expect when they get there is also something that's really important.
Excellent insight. Thank you all so much for being such experts on this topic, sharing your insights with us today and answering some of these questions. I'm going to pass it now to Rachel Goldmeyer to close us out.
Hello again, everyone. This is Rachel Goldmeyer from Starclough Disability Institute speaking. And with that, we have now reached the end of today's webinar. Please do let us know what you thought. We are going to go ahead and share the link for the satisfaction survey. And again, it would be so helpful if you can take a few minutes to fill it out, because we always improve by reading each and every satisfaction form, and we always think about how we can be better. On behalf of our entire team, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you for being here, as well as our speakers, Daniel, Kevin, and Jason, for sharing their knowledge, their passion, and their perspectives. We hope you're walking away today with not only new insights, but also new possibilities around budgeting, universal design, and creating a more inclusive, equitable, and livable future for us all. We have 2 more Universal Design webinars happening this year. There will be one in June and one in August or September. And our Universal Design Summit 8 is scheduled for November 18th through November 20th of this year, and it'll be happening in St. Louis, Missouri. We're going to have presenters and attendees from across the country with networking opportunities, continuing education units, tours, and more. You're not going to want to miss it. To make sure you stay in the loop, please take a moment to sign up for our mailing list if you have not already, or if you did not indicate when you signed up that you would like us to sign up for our newsletter. We'll put the link in the chat for our newsletter so you can stay connected with us at all points in time. And once we get the captions from today's event cleaned up, we'll be sending out the recording of today's webinar as well as a few bonus resources. If you found any value in this session, we do encourage you to share out today's recording with your network, because the more people who are part of this conversation, the greater the impact we can create. We will follow up with those of you who requested either AIA, continuing education units, or a certificate of completion. So please keep an eye on your inbox, and keep in mind it might take a couple weeks for us to get all of that resolved, since there's quite a few people that opted for the continuing education units and the certificate. Thank you again for being here and for the work you're doing in your own life to create a more inclusive future. We look forward to being in touch again soon. In the meantime, take care, stay curious, and we hope to have your participation in our programming with both of those webinars still to come, as well as our Universal Design Summit 8 later this year. Have a great afternoon or morning wherever you're at, and we'll be in touch again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.